When it comes to transportation, people generally choose the most convenient way to get around, whether that's by train, bike, or car. In US cities, that is generally by car, and especially true in spread out suburban locations. Ask yourself, why is that? That's when we have to look at the decisions that have been made for our cities over the last 60 to 70 years and how they were made to prioritize driving. Here is a time lapse showing the sprawling growth of my old home of Las Vegas, Nevada over the past 30 to 40 years. It spread outwards into one of the most car-centric places with roads so wide they can be seen dissecting the city in these images. When everyone in a city is essentially forced to drive a car, traffic congestion continually gets worse and ultimately makes driving less convenient and more stressful.
Wow, that's a lot of cars, huh?
This is when alternative transportation options can become more desirable. That is, if there's the proper infrastructure for it. I love walkable cities with great transit access, but many suburban areas in the US are too spread out to be holistically walkable or transit-supportive. But for shorter trips, they can be relatively competitive for biking. I mean, who wouldn't want to be riding down this path, right? In this video, I'm going to touch on 3 criteria that I believe will help get more people going places by bike. These criteria are that the network must be comfortable, safe, and convenient. I'll cover these in more detail in future videos, but for now, I'll touch on comfortable bike facilities. Comfort can mean several things such as what the perceived safety of our route is and even how enjoyable it is to ride. We as humans are generally guided by emotions in our thinking and choices. Now I'm going to show a few examples of infrastructure types that you can think to yourself how this feels. What about this trail along a river? What about this protected bike lane that uses parked cars in the curb to separate it from the street? How about this bike lane? By contrast, how about this side path along the road? What about this quiet neighborhood street? How about this decent buffered bike lane that ends and then forces you to fend for yourself in this right turn lane? Next, I like to look at the behaviors of those who are riding, such as this teenager who's riding on the sidewalk instead of the bike lane, as well as this dad who's riding on the sidewalk to keep out of that right turn lane, and these people who have a trail to use instead of being in the street with cars. Some routes have both bike lanes in the roadway, like here, and a trail, like here. Think to yourself, which one would you rather be in, or you and your family members for that matter? Even the more experienced riders tend to choose the trail, like this guy, and I don't blame him. When a bike route feels safe and is really enjoyable, then people are even more likely to choose to go by bike, such as these people on a bike path over by the lake. If there isn't bike infrastructure that feels comfortable or no infrastructure at all, people will generally stick to their car even if it is less convenient. And the more people on the road just adds to the traffic congestion problem. If more local trips are done by bike, then that preserves capacity for regional trips on our roads. And honestly, I could probably go faster than these cars on my bike with all this traffic. This leads us to our second criteria, which is safety. This is very similar to comfort, but this instead looks at the actual safety of a facility and how that is affected by design. People of all types are already out there riding, regardless of facility type, the weather, or even the temperature. Just about every time I go to this Taco Bell, I see bikes parked there. And I don't know what's more sad, the number of times I go to Taco Bell, or the fact that the people who rode here had to use infrastructure like this. Safe infrastructure really needs to look at human behaviors, such as this cyclist going the wrong way in a bike lane, or this family who chose not to cross this major highway to access the trail, but now is stuck with a dead-end sidewalk. High-speed roads are designed with shoulders to provide forgiveness to those who are driving. As you can see, this truck and SUV are weaving into the shoulder space as intended. I really don't think we should be putting vulnerable people into space purposely designed for high-speed traffic to drive into. Do you want to be this guy on a bike with a speeding car flying by? I doubt it. Human behavior dictates that people usually take the path of least resistance. which leads to people driving in the on-street bike lane space. And in this case, there is a separate bike path to use, which is what I prefer. Separated bike facilities, whether it's a bike path or protected bike lane, should be standard on any road beyond the local street to ensure protection from traffic. Because let me tell you this, most people don't want anything to do with being around all these cars in this bike lane. Another issue I've seen with standard bike lanes are that obstacles are placed in the way that force you into traffic. Let me ask you this, what would happen if you just blocked a vehicle lane with a sign or a parked car? You'd probably get some pretty certain road rage coming your way. Standards for bike facilities can be used as a guide that dictate what kind of separation and protection is needed. When it comes to bikes, the Dutch do it best. I mean, just look at this protected bike lane that's filmed by one of my favorite YouTube channels, Bicycle Dutch. This chart from the Dutch Crow Manual guides bike facility types based on road classification, traffic speeds and volumes, bike volumes, and ultimately show what is required based on those criteria. This street is low volume and low speed, so it's okay to share this road. However, with this high-speed highway, there's a bike path that allows people to be as far from traffic as possible. Safety critically needs to look at conflict points of where travel paths of cars, bikes, and pedestrians intersect, such as this driveway crossing on this trail. Low-speed crossings can occur at grade, and traffic calming elements, such as this raised crossing, can reduce vehicle speeds to the point where there's a low likelihood of severe injury or fatality. You can see how slowly these cars are passing this point where the bikes cross. Where there is high-speed traffic, grade separation is needed to remove the conflict entirely, which eliminates potential of a severe or fatal accident, and also removes a psychological barrier to people wanting to walk or bike. Other design issues include ensuring visibility at conflict points. In this case, it's difficult for me to see the oncoming traffic and for them to see me because that parking was allowed to be too close. It is critical to plan and design infrastructure that is safe and forgiving for all people just trying to get around. That includes designing safe facilities with the needed separation and by slowing down cars and ensuring visibility at conflict points. Everyone should have the right to get around in safety with or without a car. The last criteria is that infrastructure for biking must allow for convenience. Cities can be planned that provide a greater level of connectivity with shorter travel distances for biking than for driving. When I talk connectivity, I consider connectivity both on a macro scale and on a micro scale. I would describe macro connectivity as a system of citywide comfortable and safe bike lanes and paths that are interconnected to provide many routes to get to different destinations around town. This map is my personal Strava heat map showing my biking over the past year. It highlights a well-connected network of trails and traffic-calm local streets that allow for great access by bike. I will cover this more in a future video, but proper land use and design is a critical part of what makes a place bikeable. This includes having activity or commercial centers that are connected to where you live. These green circles are centers I have safe and comfortable access to today, and the blue circles are centers that are under construction. Microconnectivity includes whether someone can easily access a bike path or not, or comfortably cross a barrier like a road intersection. In this area, we see a neighborhood that includes a trail along a river next to it. Seems like a great amenity to have, right? Then you find out that this entire section of the neighborhood only has two access points, both here and here. These access points are 3/4 of a mile apart and really limit how these residents can get onto that bike path. And when access is so limited, it really makes it inconvenient and a tougher sell for anyone who wants to get around by bike. We can certainly do better than that. Here's an access example of two connecting bike facilities. You're riding along and you take this bike ramp to connect to a buffered bike lane. Then you get to the top and you find there's no ramp connection. This is a major pain point that you have to make these connections smooth and easy. This is even worse when I'm in the family cargo bike. Here's an example of a high-speed highway crossing that creates a huge barrier to those who want to walk or bike. This intersection gives no protected space for those riding and forces you to look in several directions at once to make sure no one turning hits you. By contrast, here's an example of a bike path that goes under a similar high-speed highway that eliminates the conflicts with traffic. Which crossing would you rather use? That's probably a dumb question, but I know which one I'm staying away from. You could have top-notch Dutch-style protected bike lanes or bike paths, but as soon as you have to cross a dangerous major roadway at grade, most people will just opt for the steel cage of safety and drive. Then we continue the spiraling cycle of induced roadway travel demand and traffic congestion. You must consider both the macro and micro connectivity issues for bike facilities or prevent people from wanting to bike places. Here's an example of a place with connectivity on a macro scale. It looks pretty well connected on the bike layer here in Google Maps. However, when you look up close, you see that the street crossings are either non-existent or unsafe, which breaks up the connectivity and prevents people from wanting to use the trail network or puts them in harm's way. When a community is proliferated with micro-connectivity gaps, then you'll be disappointed that most people still choose a car to get around. So please make the investment in the macro network worth it by also including micro-connectivity. Next, I'm going to take off from my home in Utah and look at a place that does it right, the Netherlands. This is Utrecht and is one of the most bikeable cities in the world and serves as an example to all on how to create a well-connected, safe network of bike paths. In this image, you can see in the green the well-connected network of bike paths at the macro scale. You can see they have also mastered the details at the micro scale using the principles of sustainable safety. In this street view of that roundabout, you can see that the bike paths are always connected. Let me tell you what, I would ride on this any day compared to the wager against my life at the highway crossing in Utah. When considering connectivity of multiple travel modes, not every mode needs to take the same route. I learned from one of my favorite YouTube channels, Not Just Bikes, that Amsterdam, the Netherlands, utilizes the principle of disentangling their routes into separate prioritized corridors called hoofnets and plusnets. These separate corridors are shown in different colors on this map from the city website for Amsterdam. Here's an example in South Jordan, Utah of what this might look like. If I'm starting at this school and going to this light rail station by car, I would take this route since the street doesn't connect through for cars. However, if I was walking or biking, I could take a more direct route through here. This allows people walking and biking to travel on a lower traffic street, which makes it more comfortable and safe to use. While we may not be Amsterdam, where the people on bikes make cars tremble in their tires, it is absolutely possible in places like the US to create active, livable, and more sustainable communities through providing a well-balanced and safe system of infrastructure that accommodates all modes of travel. We just need to rethink how we design and prioritize our transportation infrastructure. Even with the relatively minimal improvements to making biking more comfortable, safe, and convenient, I have seen amazing results where I live in the Daybreak community when compared to typical American suburban sprawl. That's all I have for you today. Don't forget to subscribe and look out for more videos to come. Thanks again for joining me on the Bike Quest with Mike West.